Before we get started adding functionality to our app, let's fix a couple of styles that are a little bit broken here at the moment. So right now, if we look at our profile page, we see all of a user's posts that they've made. If we go to data.js and make their posts an empty array instead of an array of 10 elements, we can see the no content for the posts. And we see that it's a bit askew. So to fix that, we need to go to styles.js and look for the profile posts section, that property, and set display to flex and justify content to center. And one other style I'd like to fix is the expanded one, where we can set display to inline block instead of just block. Now with that out of the way, we're going to add authentication to our app so we can differentiate all of the users that have accounts versus those that are anonymous and are visiting our app for the first time. And to do that, we're going to use the service Firebase. We're going to integrate Firebase with Hasura, and it's going to give us a lot of useful sign-up features. It's going to give us sign up with email and password, as well as third-party authentication. So it's going to enable us to have users log in through Google or Facebook or a lot of other options if we so choose. And we're going to be following this guide here on the official Hasura blog. So I had to go to this link, hasura.io/blog. You can see the entire URL here, or you can just search for the title. And we're going to follow a lot of these steps here. It's going to speed up the process quite a bit. And our first step is going to be to create and deploy a Hasura instance. So we can just go to hasura.io and follow the steps that we did before to do so. Or you can just click this link, deploy Hasura to Heroku guide, and then click on that purple deploy to Heroku button. And once you're done creating your app, you want to, at the very bottom, once the app has been deployed to Heroku, you want to click on the links Manage App as well as View. We want to go to the Heroku page, the Heroku dashboard, as well as our console. We'll see why in just a second. So once it's been created, we want to add some environment variables or some config vars to Heroku. The first one being a secret, which is going to function as kind of a password to make sure that other users, anyone else, isn't able to access our GraphQL console and change data in our database. So we're going to need to add the following key, Hasura GraphQL admin secret. We can just copy it from the blog post. We're going to add this key, and in our Heroku dashboard, we'll go to the Settings tab, and then scroll down and hit Reveal Config Vars. And here we can add a key and a value. We can add a key value pair. So we're going to paste in Heroku or Hasura GraphQL admin secret as the key, and then for the value, we just want to add our own password. I'll set mine to React 12 and then hit Add. Then we can head down. There's some explanation here on how to add permissions for each set of data that you add. We're not going to add permissions at this point. We might later on, but we can add specific permissions to make sure only authenticated users can do certain things within our app. Generally speaking, it's going to be fine for us just to separate the app from unauthenticated routes versus authenticated routes. That's going to do enough for us. But if we wanted to add more security, we could add permissions on a case-by-case basis for each table that we have within our app. So we're going to scroll down and we're going to see how to add Firebase. The first thing we'll need to do is to create a Firebase project. You can do so for free by going to firebase.google.com, and then you'll select Go to Console. You'll need to sign in with a Google account. And once you're there, once you're signed in, you'll want to select Add Project. I've already added a project. You'll just really need to provide a name for it. And you should be taken to the dashboard. And once you're there, you should see on the left-hand side this authentication option. And for authentication, the first thing that we want to set up is a sign-in method. So we'll select this Setup Sign-in Method option, and we want to enable email and password sign-up. So we'll hit the Edit button here on the right, and then select this first switch here to enable email and password sign-up and save that. Now our next step is going to be to create a cloud function. A cloud function is very much like a Hasura event trigger, which is executed in response to a given action. So for Firebase, what we want to do here is we want to create a cloud function that's going to run in response to a user being signed up. So we have all of the code here that's going to enable us to execute this function whenever a user is created. Our cloud function is going to detect when that happens in our client. We're going to get our user, and we're going to set up these custom claims. And what a custom claim will do is it's going to associate that created user with some data, some Hasura data, so that Hasura recognizes that this is a valid user that we can actually sign in. You can see all of the claims values here, including the role, as well as their user ID. That comes from Firebase. And it's going to associate that data as a custom claim. So we're going to create and deploy this function. To do so, we're going to head to our project, and in the root of our project we'll make a functions folder with a file in it, index.js, that this will run out of, and we can copy all of this code here and paste it right in and save. Now we can open a new terminal tab and use the Firebase Tools CLI in order to deploy it. So the first thing you'll likely want to do is you'll need to log in. So you'll run npx firebase login. If you're getting a 401 error, you might need to add the reauth flag. And once you're logged in, once the Firebase CLI recognizes you and that you've signed up through the console, through the web console, you'll run Firebase, npx firebase init. And through the options, we'll select functions, hit the spacebar to select it, hit enter, and then we want to choose the Firebase project that we just created. Mine was Insta React 12. And then it'll give us a number of options. What language would you like to use? This is JavaScript. Do you want to use ESLint? We'll say no, since we're not writing any code. And it's going to ask us to overwrite the index.js file. We don't want to do that since we created it and have all of our code there. And yes, we do want to install dependencies with npm. And all of the dependencies are going to live in this functions folder. They're going to be separate from the node modules folder that we have in the root of our project. Once that's done, you should see a few more files created. This firebase.json file, this firebase rc file. This is just some configuration info. And finally, we want to deploy this with npx firebase deploy. And to be more specific, we could also say -- only functions. Hopefully at the end you see deploy complete. If you're getting a 500 error for some reason throughout this process, just wait a little bit. It's an error on Firebase's side. So once that's deployed, we are able to head to our console. And instead of authentication, instead of going to that tab, if we go to the functions tab, if we look at the dashboard, we should see a function called process sign up, and that is the name of this exported function. And it's going to be triggered when a user is created, and we can see some other additional information about it. And we have some info about its health, as well as logs that will appear once it's actually triggered. So now what we want to do is set up things on the client side. And in addition to having our users authenticated through Firebase, we also want to create them in Hasura. So we can go down to the next step and take a look at the React side of things. Now we want to hook up Apollo. That's the first thing that we want to do. And we're going to begin by creating our GraphQL folder, and within it making a client.js file. So we want to set up our client. So first we'll import Apollo client from apollo-client. Then we want WebSocket link and in-memory cache. And I believe this can either come from Apollo cache in memory or from Apollo Boost. We'll do Apollo cache in memory. So we want to set up a new Apollo client where the link is set to a new WebSocket link. The URI is going to be found in our console on the GraphQL tab. So we'll take that endpoint, but we're going to change HTTPS to WSS. Then for options, we'll set reconnect to true. And then we're going to have this connection params object. We're going to set the headers property to its own object, and I'll create a variable for that above headers. It's going to be an object. We're going to need to supply the secret that we just included, that we just added to our config vars. And note that when you refresh Hasura, you're going to be asked to sign in with that secret. So you're going to need to provide that on every request that you make, and we'll do so by supplying the header x Hasura admin secret and set that to whatever you set your secret to. Then after the link, we want to set up the cache with a new in-memory cache. So we'll put all of that in a new client and we'll export that at the bottom. Then in index.js in source, we'll import Apollo provider to provide our client to our app from add Apollo React hooks, and we'll just have it wrap everything. Now that's set up, and one more thing that we want to do, if we take a look at the blog post, is there's a bit of client code that we want to add, and this is going to take care of all of our Firebase integration, meaning all the code that we need to do things like sign in with Google, sign out, log in with email and password, sign up with email and password, etc. So we're going to find this auth file, and we want to copy all of it, copy this entire code snippet, and we want to create our own auth.js file. And that will be in the root of source. So we'll paste that all in. Now, the goal here is, in addition to having these methods, we want to provide those methods to different parts of our app. Naturally, we'd want sign in with Google to be available in both of our pages, login and sign up. We want to provide those functions to the necessary pages or components. And the way that we're going to do that is by turning this entire auth component into what we'll call auth provider. And this is going to enable us to provide all of the auth data to our app. And we're going to provide it using React context. So that means we're going to get our auth state and our user data from anywhere in our app that it needs to be. So I'm going to call this component auth provider, and I'm going to make sure, first of all, to export it at the bottom. I'm just going to reconfigure some things according to the way I like to write code. You certainly don't have to refactor this if you don't want. I'm going to remove where we imported useState and useEffect and change that to react.useState and react.useEffect. We don't need to return this, the result of this listener, or I should say we don't need to return this listener on auth state changed. And what this does is that this is going to listen for any changes in our user data. This is a Firebase function. So when, for example, a user logs in, we're going to be able to get their user data, and we're going to be able to check that it has that specific claim. Then it's going to set all of that data, set all of that user data in our auth state. And it's going to say that we're in, meaning we're logged in, and it's going to provide our user data and token. If a refresh is required, meaning if our token's expired, and it's going to take care of doing that. And we're storing that on this metadata ref. That's going to be stored in a Firebase real-time database node. And it's going to refresh our token and reset our state. Otherwise, if it doesn't have that claim, then we're going to set the auth state to out, meaning person is logged out, they're not authenticated. Otherwise, we're going to assume they have a status of loading. So for right now, the necessary thing to do is to actually provide all of our Firebase SDK information. So we'll head back to our project settings. So we'll just hit the gear icon and go to project settings. And if we scroll down, we'll see this Firebase SDK snippet, and we can copy this entire Firebase config object that you see here. That's to initialize our app. That's really the only required step. And as I mentioned, I'm just going to refactor things a bit right now. I'm going to change these functions here, these methods here, to function declarations. This is going to be called sign in with Google. This will be an async function. I'm going to remove the error handling. We're going to take care of that within our sign up and login pages. This will be called sign out. Again, make that async. Remove the try catch. And here at the bottom, I'm not going to create this variable content. We're just going to return null if we're in a state of loading. We're not going to return anything. Otherwise, we want to return just want to return some context that we haven't created yet. We're going to put all of these methods, sign in with Google, sign out, and all the ones that we'll create in the future on some context. So we're going to say up at the top, react.createContext, and we're going to call this auth context, and we'll make sure to export it. So back down here, we can remove all of this, and we're just going to add auth context.provider. And on the value prop, we'll add an object that for now just consists of auth state, sign in with Google, and sign out. And this is going to wrap our entire app, here within index. So we want it to accept the children. And we will remove the app import up at the top. We want auth provider to accept the children prop. So that's passed between the auth context provider tags. So I believe that looks good for now. We'll go to index and we'll import auth provider from auth. and we'll have it wrap everything. Good. And to make sure that this works, to test that it works, we can go into app, for example, and we can say react.useContext. We can import our newly created auth context, and from our object we can destructure that and grab auth state and see what that is now. So if we return to our app, and I also forgot to import client back in index.js, import client from ./GraphQL/client. And make sure we put it in source. Okay, just had to restart the development server. If we look at our console, see an object, and we see the status is out, as we would expect. So now let's take care of actually signing up our user. We'll go to the sign up page, and we're going to need to have a method where we can sign up with username and password. So we'll go back to auth, and we have sign in with Google right now, but we want to create a new function. This will be async, and it's going to be called sign up with email and password. It's going to accept some form data as an object, and we're going to await. We're going to use a method that returns a promise here. We're going to await firebase.auth. All of these methods are going to be on the auth, the executed auth method. Sign up, or rather create user with email and password. So we're going to create a user with email and password. The first parameter is going to be the email. It's going to come from formdata.email, and the password from formdata.password. Now this is going to return our newly created user, so we can put the result in a variable called data. And we want to make sure that this is a new user. And we also want to create that user in Hasura, in our Postgres database here. So we can do so with the check if data.additionaluserinfo.isNewUser. If that's true, then we want to provide all of the variables to a new mutation to create our user. So before we create that mutation, we want to create in the data tab a new table for users. So the table name will be users. First column will be an ID, the type UUID, and we'll use the genRandomUUID function. Next will be username. This will be text and no default value, and it will have the unique constraint. It'll need to be unique because every user's username is linked to their profile through the URL. So they all need to be different. The name is going to have a type of text. Email is going to have the type of text, and Firebase will ensure that this is unique for us. Then we're going to have a bio. That'll be text, website, text. Then one called user_ID. This is going to be the user ID from Firebase, and it's going to be of type text. We don't have to add the unique constraint. It's going to be unique by default. Then we're going to have phone_number. You would think that this would be a number, but people sometimes use hyphens in their phone numbers. We want to accept those too, so we'll use text. Then we'll have their profile_image. That'll be text, since that'll be a URL. And we're also going to have one more of last_checked. And this is going to be a value that we hold on to determine when a user last checks their notifications. And you would think that this would be, since we're kind of putting in a period of time, you would think that this might be a timestamp, but we're actually going to use text as well, because we're going to create this on the client and we're going to turn it into a string. Now this will be null by default, so we want this to be nullable. So now that we have all that, we want to select our primary key, which will be the ID, and that should be it. We can add our table. Now with that, we can create a mutation. And to do that, we'll go into source, GraphQL, and we'll make a mutations file, mutations.js, not a folder, but a file. And we might as well create queries as well as mutations and subscriptions at the same time. Since we'll be making all of them, we might as well make them now. And for mutations, first we'll import GQL from Apollo Boost. And we're going to export const a variable which we'll name createUser. So for this, we can head to our console, our graphical console, and there we can set up a new mutation. And here we'll call this createUser. And here we want to insert users. We want to insert a new user. And we'll provide this objects. We'll provide our values to this objects object. And we'll start by declaring all of our variables. These will be user ID. We'll write this in camel case. We won't write it in the underscore style like this, because these are all going to be coming from our JavaScript files. So we'll use the camel case convention for that. User ID, this is going to be a string and required. We're going to provide that type for each one of these variables. The name will be string and required. Username, string and required. Email, bio, website, profile image, and finally phone number, also in camel case. So at this point, we can select on objects here on the left-hand side that we want to provide user ID. I don't like how this does this. Why did it remove all my variables? Hold on. Let's just copy this and paste it in createUser. And I'll create a new mutation, and for objects, we can select user ID, username, website, profile image, phone number, name, email, and bio. Since those are a lot of fields, we don't want to have to write those out. And I'll just copy this right here, just that line. And we can provide all of them, provide all the variable values to the individual arguments. So user ID will be here, username, website, profile image, phone number, name, email, and bio. And since we're not updating the cache, we really don't need to return anything from this. If we look at returning, we don't need any of that information. We can just select affected rows since we need to provide something. So we'll add affected rows here, and only one row is going to be affected for every time we create a user. Now, since we've got that, we can provide our variables object here back within sign up with email and password, where the user ID is going to be set to data.user.uid from Firebase. Name is going to be from formdata.name, username from formdata.username, email from data.user.email. It could also come from our form data. Bio is set to an empty string. They'll be able to edit that in their profile, edit profile page, as well as website. So those will both be empty strings. And profile image, we'll just set this to a default user image. We'll import default user image from /images/ I believe it's default dash user dash image dot JPEG, and we'll provide that to profile image, and finally phone number, which will just be an empty string. With all of that, we can execute our mutation. So we'll bring in the use mutation hook, and we'll import our create user variable. And then we'll get back an array and call our create our mutate function, create user. Head down here with all of our variables, we'll execute create user. And this is the approach I'll use to passing in all of the variables, creating an object, and then passing variables in as the property name and value. And we can await this too, where we can get back all of our new user data if we wanted, but we don't really need to do that since we're just returning affected rows. So now we want to execute all of this, execute sign up with email and password. You can see at the moment we're not using it, so we want to provide that to our value object, then back in sign up. We can read from context, use context, read from auth context, and then destructure sign up with email and password. And we're going to add validation here in the next step, but right now we just want to make sure that that this works. We have a user created both in Firebase and in our Hasura database. So let's just create a pretty standard approach to holding on to all of our form values. We'll use state, and we'll use an object where we collect the email, name, username, and password. We'll call this values, and the setter will be set values. We'll have a handle change function. It's going to update these values accordingly once we get the event, whenever there's an on change, whenever there's a change event. We'll get data about the name of the input that was typed into as well as its value. And we're going to call set values with its previous data. We'll spread all of that in. We need to manually do this with state updates using use state, and then we're going to use a computed property to set the name to its respective value, like so. And then we'll add finally a handle submit for the form itself, where we just call event.preventDefault, and we can make this async, and we can await sign up with email and password and pass in all of our values there. And afterwards we might want to navigate to the home page, so we can use history, get back history, and redirect there with history.push/. Then to connect all of this, we'll go to our form, set the on submit to handle submit. For the first text field, it'll have a name of email, and we'll set the on change to handle change. We'll copy these two lines and provide it underneath, where the name is name, username. For the username text field, name is username, and finally for password, the name is password. So again, right now we're not thinking about validation. We just want to make sure that this works and that we wrote our mutation correctly. We get a new user in both Firebase and in our Hasura database. So let's go to account/email signup. Our auth state says that our status is out. Then we'll provide some email. I'll provide, say, one of user 10, full name user 10, username user 10, and password of user 10. I'd recommend using an actually somewhat valid email here. It has to be a, an accurate or a valid email. It doesn't have to be one you own per se, but just some random one. And then a password has to be provided of I believe at least 5 or 6 characters. These are just Firebase's rules. So let's hit sign up and see what happens. Hopefully we're redirected back to the home page, the root route. And it looks like we're getting an error. Sign up with email and password is not a function. So if we go to auth, forgot to save that. Let's try that again. And for index file, we'll provide the Apollo provider last. It says it's not finding our client that we set up. Let's try that again. Okay. Now we'll provide all these values again. Hit sign up. And we're taken to the home page. And if we look at our auth state, we see out, out, out. So let's try this one more time. I'm going to go to application and then hit clear site data in the clear storage tab, and then I'm going to go back to the email sign up. One quick message from the future. I want you to be aware of one thing that I just took a look at, which I believe fixed my problem in relation to authentication not working, logging in and still getting status out even when it should be in. What I believe you need to do is you need to go to the database tab and select the real-time database. And this is where we're actually storing data, metadata about each user that's signed in according to their user ID. We're storing information about when their refresh time is, to refresh their token. Now, what I believe you need to change is the rules here for the real-time database. And to do that, you need to edit the rules and namely set read and write to true. And once you do this, I believe this will fix your problems regarding actually adding all of the Hasura claims to the given user whenever a given user signs up. So just change those 2 rules and you should be good to go. Okay, good. So now it looks like it's working and it's picking up the claim. We see status in, we see our token and user. And if we refresh, we should still see the status of in, and we do. So good, now we have authentication working. And we've made a good first step since we see that we're creating users both in Firebase and in Hasura.